And here to discuss this all further is Jeffrey Wells, visiting fellow with the National Security Institute at the George Mason University's Antonin Scalia Law School. Jeffrey, thank you so much for joining us. So as we look to this grim one-year mark tomorrow, what is a possible path forward to get these hostages home? Is diplomacy the best possible option here?
Diplomacy would be the best possible option. I just don't see that diplomacy is going to be in the near future. Unfortunately, with the current situation, both in Lebanon and with Iran launching attacks, Israel is in a true war footing and is defending its sovereignty. And I think that all chances of a peace deal or at least a ceasefire at the moment is off the table, especially as we enter here the last month before the election. I think the U.S. has no leverage to make any sort of ceasefire or diplomatic conversation take place that would release and free the hostages and return the remains of those who unfortunately have been killed to their families. And I just don't see any solution even for civilians on either side at the moment.
And something that we've heard from the families of the hostages who are still alive, but even the families of the hostages who they simply would like to have their bodies recovered so they can bury them and put them to rest, have said, these military operations, the last time the Israeli military was close to rescuing hostages, we saw more than half a dozen people murdered just moments before they were able to be rescued. And families are worried that that could happen to their loved ones who may still be alive at this time. Is a military operation possibly going to see success, or unfortunately are these hostages facing a really horrible situation where there's not really a way out for them?
I like to consider myself an optimist, but also a realist. And I think that the Israeli operation to target Hamas, and certainly there have been 30,000+ civilian casualties, it has disrupted Hamas's ability to even operate from any level of leadership. And so being able to communicate with those who are holding them hostage, I don't know that there's any communication structure in place or any command structure that would be able to stave off a terrible situation where the hostages are killed, or could even begin to understand where they're being held and where any remains may be. And I think that unfortunately, the military operation has hindered the possibility of release of any hostages in the foreseeable future. I just don't see that there's a methodology or a mechanism in place to have that conversation between the Israelis and Hamas take place.
A really, really tough situation to see any path forward. And as you said, it feels at this point that the U.S. has no leverage. We hear, though, President Biden continuing to stress they're working on a deal. They're working on a deal. But we hear the protests in the streets of Israel week after week saying more needs to be done, specifically calling on Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to close the negotiating gaps and make a deal. Where do you see the real holes, though, here? Does Israel need to compromise more? Is Hamas the one moving the goalposts? From your perspective, what is the true holdup here?
I think that there's, as my colleague Lester Munson says, there's a 3D chess that's going on, and Hamas, needs to move closer, but unfortunately, I think being able to connect to the leadership is very difficult. I think that, from the Israeli perspective, their leadership, and certainly Netanyahu, is very focused on fighting on all fronts at the moment and is less willing to negotiate. So I think, and then there's the complexities between the fact that we have a lame duck president. We don't know who the next president's going to be. There's no leverage. And then there's global tensions between the Russian and Iranian relationship, the war in Ukraine. all these things are really closely tied together. And I think that, that terrorist organizations and fundamentalists in general are seeing, this is an opportunity to recruit new organization, new members to the organization, and disturb, the ultimate outcome. I don't think that any of the players really see the civilians that are stuck in this, at least at the moment, as something that they want to focus on. I think they're more interested in sort of the political gains and the future sovereignty of geography, and that makes things very unpleasant for family members and for civilians as a whole. And my heart goes out to everyone that's been impacted by this.
Yeah, absolutely. A chess game with a lot of players and so many moving pieces at once. Jeffrey Wells, thank you.
Thanks for having me.